So Dr. Imogen Wood is a pottery specialist and petrographer based in Southwest England with 25 years of experience in regional prehistoric, Romano-British and early medieval ceramics. Her career spans field archaeology, doctoral research and freelance work. And now I just need to share her screen. 1 second. This and share. Okay. Everything all right with that, Imogen?
Yeah.
Great.
Thanks very much, Emily, the intro. Okay, so what are we going to talk about is petrographic analysis. So what is it? Why use it? What can it tell us? And when to use it? So I think those are the very important pieces that you really need to know if you're starting out and looking at this and considering it perhaps in a project. So next. Okay, petrology or petrography? It's the most common question I get asked, or just people get confused with. So petrological analysis is really identifying rocks and minerals. It's very straightforward. This is a rock, this is where it's from, and this is a mineral. Whereas petrographic analysis is more descriptive. So it's more about the texture of the rocks. It's the quantity, how many of those rocks are in the fabric, the quality of them. Are they weathered? Are they abraded? So that's more relevant to pottery analysis. So we prefer to use the term sort of petrographic analysis. And if you're looking at more sort of stone objects, petrological analysis is more relevant. So quite a long time ago, in the late 19th century, archaeologists realised that if you can identify rocks in pottery, you can find out where they come from. So that was very useful. And then it became more of a standard tool in the 1970s with the pioneering work with David Peacock and Ian Freestone, looking at initially Aegean pottery, and also David Peacock looking at Gabbroic pottery, Iron Age pottery, which is from Cornwall in the southwest. So that's sort of where it started. Next. So how do you make thin sections? How do you look at this pottery? First of all, it uses a polarizing microscope, and you have to make thin sections of pottery. There's a picture there of some thin sections, and the thin sections have to be very thin slices of pottery, so 30 microns, that's less than 0.5 millimeter, and it's got to be exactly that thickness, because at that thickness you can see the minerals, and each mineral does different things, different colors, it has different shapes, it does different things when you're in cross-polarized and polarized light. If it's rotated, if you move the mineral, it'll go in and out of extinction and have different colors as it changes. So that's unique, and we can only get that at that thickness. So believe me, when I've made them before and haven't got it right, you can't see anything. So that's very important. So you look at these distinctive elements, and so how do you actually provenance this pottery? What do these minerals mean? How do we get there? And very simply, it's from the clay, which and the parent rocks as well, which perhaps uses temper. So the clay is, imagine you've got a granite upland, sort of moorland, and rivers would, come off those moorlands or come into river terraces. And as it's coming off that area, it's got bits of granite in it. So they'll be quite angular, and there'll be minerals associated with that. And it starts to weather and weather as it goes down the river. And you'd have maybe they become more rounded, or some soft minerals would sort of erode or sort of come out or out of the material in the clay. And then as you get further down, that river might go through an area of sandstone. And so bits of sandstone, bits of quartz might get incorporated. You might have rounded quartz. And so as that river or that seabed carries on going, you'll get different elements coming in to that. And even if that clay was formed in the Ice Age or at different periods, you can look at all those individual elements and try and work out where it came from based on the angularity of the rocks, the weathering of the clay, what range of minerals you've got in it. So it's a bit like piecing together a picture of how that clay formed or where those rocks came from. So that's how you actually sort of basically work out the provenance. Next. So hopefully this should work. This is an animation looking at a slide under the microscope. And as you can see, if you can see that big inclusion that's got bright yellow and something white and something stripy, the white one is quartz, and it will always go white, grey, black as it's rotated. And so that's very easy to identify quartz. And then the yellow stripy one there is muscovite mica, and that is always has the colours yellow, electric pink, blue, and it always goes in and out of extinction, changes colour slightly, and so you know that's muscovite mica. And to the side, if you could do it again, play it again, Emily, that'd be really good. So to the side, you can see the black and white stripy one that sort of goes in and out, black and white, and that mineral is feldspar, plagioclase feldspar. So all of these are stuck together. So this is a piece of granite, it's a piece of granite rock. So we know that's a piece of granite that's come from an igneous source nearby, you know, at somewhere. And so now we've got to look at it in more detail. Has this clay been tempered, or are these granite rocks just coming off the uplands into the clay, into a stream or a river? So we need to then look at how rounded is it? Is it angular? What's the size of it in relation to the clay? So perhaps if these pieces of granite are all the same size and the clay in the background doesn't have any stones in it at all, or any large inclusions, then that suggests that all the other inclusions were taken out of the clay, and then someone put chunks of granite, either if they're rounded, it could suggest it's a water-worn sort of sand grabbed from a stream further down, or if their rocks are angular, they could have been crushed and then added as temper. So that suggests that would be temper. But if you're looking at it and you've got the minerals, and in this section, you might be able to spot there are bits of plagioclase feldspar, there are bits of quartz and bits of mica within this clay. And so if they're graded, if you've got big bits of granite and then you've got all the minerals that belong to that granite that have fallen off it and weathered over time into this clay, you could say that they just dug this clay up near an igneous source and they didn't do anything to it. So you're looking at the processes. What's happened to this clay? What's in this pottery? Have people added things from somewhere else, a sand from somewhere else? Have they just dug the clay up at the bank of a stream and just gone with it and thought, yeah, this is good enough, let's make a pot from this? So you're really looking at all of those details, and the more details you can record, the better. So the size, the rounding of inclusions, the colours, what the minerals are. And the problem with clay minerals is that they alter over time. So one mineral can become 3 minerals. So it's very confusing. And when I did my PhD, I went to have some training at the geology department at Exeter University, and I showed him a slide of some pottery, and he said, whoa, I can't, clay's messed up. That's very difficult to look at, because all those minerals could have been other minerals and they've altered over time. So you've really got to try and work out what has gone on there, what's happened. Okay, next slide. So looking at clay sourcing, here we have some examples. There's fossiliferous limestone, very pretty little crinoid fossils there, which are from Jurassic sort of urchins, sea urchins. You've got the piece of granite that we saw a minute ago at the sort of bottom left there. And bottom right, there's a fabric with a big piece of gabbroite rock in it. And it's sort of sub-rounded, but there aren't many other pieces of rock sort of that size. There's quite a size difference. So this is probably gabbroite rock to use as temper. And the most exciting one there, top right, this piece of rock that I found in some pottery is from a rock from a time 380 million years ago, when the crust, Earth's crust, hit the Earth's mantle, and that is only visible in one place on one beach in planet Earth, and that's Coverack Beach in Cornwall, unless you go 7 kilometers down under the sea. So this is like, you can't get much better than that provenance wise. So that rock definitely came from that place. Whether they selected a rock and crushed it, or selected some sand near that source, or dug up clay with that mineral and those minerals derived from that clay, that is definitely where that clay or the rock temper came from. But in some ways, sometimes it can be more subjective. So the slide in the center there, that's gabbroic clay. I did my PhD on gabbroic clay, so I've looked a lot of it. And when I've talked to other petrographers, you get gabbro rocks everywhere. It's just a metamorphic rock. You can get it all throughout England, anywhere there's an igneous intrusive geology. And the unique thing that I noticed about the gabbroic clay from the lizard is the way that the felspar has altered, the way the felspar has become sericitic. It's altering to something else. So I know that it was plagioclase felspar, but it's now become this other thing. And so even though I can't say, yeah, you know, could be that, that has a distinctive look, that clay. And I know from my experience that is what it's from. And that seems to be unique to that clay source. Okay, next slide. So looking at how humans and how we can see things that people did that are very specific, if we look at the top right slide, there's a very black angular inclusion in there. And if you look within that black one, there's another angular inclusion within that. And that inclusion is actually a piece of crushed pottery that's been added to a clay fabric, possibly as a temper, but possibly for socially, cultural important reasons. And we could say, well, maybe this, you know, got in there by accident, this piece of clay from, you know, it was a pottery area where they were making pottery. Perhaps it got crushed and fell in and got incorporated. But this piece of crushed pottery had crushed pottery inside it. So we can say, actually, you know, this was a tradition. In this potter was using crushed pottery, and we've got grog in grog. So that's definitely representing a tradition. And so if you look at the slide, so the bottom right, there's a sort of diagonal voids, and some of the inclusions are also running diagonally, and that suggests that that was coil made. So that's very clearly, that's a technological trait that you see, you know, in lots of periods, but mainly prehistory. So that's very useful. And right in the bottom in the middle, you've got wheel produced pottery, and very helpfully the Saxon pottery has got grass temper or organic temper, and they're vertical, so the pot's been drawn up, the clay's been drawn up, and all the inclusions have gone sort of straight up. So that's really good indication of wheel-made pottery. Now, the most confusing in some ways is the one on the left-hand side at the bottom, and you might notice on the sort of left-hand slide there are some bent pieces of grass. There are some grass, there's sort of black inclusions, voids that are sort of going in a circle, and also some of the inclusions are on an arc. But if you look to the right, the grass is going vertically straight up. Now, this Saxon pottery, people always thought this was wheel-made pottery and assumed technologically that they were at the stage where they were making wheel-made pottery as they were in other regions. But this was actually shows that it was coil-made and then wheel-finished. So these people making this pot, were they copying the posh pottery that people down the next village were buying and technologically more advanced than them? Or were they just, you know, sort of, it was a practice pottery. He was technologically developing his own skills and moving towards wheel making pottery. So there's all these little intricacies that we can see. And in the top left, you can see this slide. It's got a little sort of black hook in the middle of it, and that's actually from chaff from a sort of a cereal grain. So this possibly suggests that this cereal grain, this chaff, was either added or was floating around when the potter was making the pot, and it got incorporated. So could this suggest perhaps that this pot was made at the end of harvest, when the grains were being winnowed, the cereal, sort of the chaff was coming off. So perhaps late August, September. So that's really specific information that's really useful to understanding archaeology and people in the past. The next slide, please. So are you a geologist or an archaeologist? And a lot of early people doing petrography were geologists that saw things as this is a rock, this comes from here. But archaeologists, as we went on, it sort of looked at it from a more archaeological perspective. And as I was saying, they were looking at those things. What does that actually mean? What were they doing to create this fabric? And during my PhD, I used my PhD as an opportunity to learn petrography. And as I said, I went to the geology department and looked at how you identify rocks. But I think my grounding as a field archaeologist and a pottery specialist gave me a different way of looking at the thin sections and seeing the people in the pots. What were they doing? You know, what was this potter trying to do? What did they do when they were making the pot? Where were they going to get the clay? And that can add to the picture. Next slide, please. So why use it? Why use petrography in your projects? Why is it important? It's an incredibly valuable tool, as I've pointed out, the things you can learn from it. And it's so unique. You can use it on any clay object, of course, and burnt clay and plaster. It's used in many different materials where you can see minerals through a polarizing microscope. And it's a lot cheaper than ICP and more lab-based, sort of very expensive equipment. It's a lot cheaper to do. The sort of current commercial price for producing a thin section is £35. And then, of course, the report time and analysis time would be on top of that. But it's quite a simple way of getting a lot of information. And most importantly, it's unique evidence of what something people did in the past. And the pottery sherd at the top is 18,000 years old. That's from, the first pottery that was being made. And you can thin section that and look at what a potter did when he made that pot. But equally, you can thin section the Paris the Paris Olympic mug, and you can find out how they made that. And that can tell you things about today as well. Next slide, please. So when should you use petrography? This is very important and something that I come across working in commercial, as a commercial petrographer. Really, it should be in the project design sort of stage before you start doing the post-ex work. You need to set aside some money or set aside a question that could be asked by petrography and not have a surprise later on thinking, oh, actually, we've got to do this. Some petrographic analysis would be really useful, and then you haven't worked that into your budget. So it's always good to just think about that at the beginning of a project, and then certainly the beginning of a research project or a commercial project. And think about the information, the research questions you want to get out of it. What do you want to specifically know out of that petrographic analysis? What questions do you want to ask? I find making simple provenance reports incredibly boring. If you just want to know where some pottery was made, fair, I can do that. That's very easy. You can say, yeah, it came from here. But it's more interesting to have a question, what is this? Were these pots relevant to a technological change which relates to moving from the Iron Age to the Roman period? Sort of what were these, how were they adding this temple? What were they doing? How were they processing this clay? So you really need to think of really interesting questions before you start this. And also, very importantly, it's a very good stage before you do more complicated sort of scientific analysis like ICP. I worked on a project where I was given one half of a sherd and someone was given another half of a sherd to do ICP analysis. And we were both doing our reports at the same time. And so the person doing the ICP had one interpretation of the pottery and I had a different interpretation, because as I was looking at the pottery, quite a lot of it had grog in it, and the grog was made from shell-tempered pottery, but the clay was from a sandy source. So it's completely mixed up, and the results for the ICP were very confusing because he'd looked at it in terms of a geological source, but actually it was a cultural source, and it was something that happened there. So if he'd read my report beforehand, and if my report had been available, he could have used that to then target certain pottery sherds and think, okay, this has got grog in it. We need to ask a different question. I need to look at the data in a specific way. And this hasn't got grog in it, so let's look at this in a specific way. So it's really important before you go into further analysis to just, work this out to begin with. Next slide, please.
Sure, you're just on 2 minutes left, okay?
Okay. So this is the last slide. Current courses. If you want to get into petrography, sadly, in this country, there are very few courses. There aren't any really specific degrees or masters in petrography. David Peacock and David Williams at Southampton were amazing petrographers, of course, but sadly, David Peacock died and David Williams is retired. So I think Southampton do a module in the undergraduate degree, but it's a skill that's being lost and it's very hard to get trained in it. But currently, there's available Patrick Quinn does a 5-day course at UCL, which is it's very good. Gives you a good start. This year it's £600, so it's not too hard to get some money from that, possibly from your employer or university. The Fitch Lab in the British School of Athens does a far more intensive, detailed 2-week course for postgraduates. I'm not sure how much that costs. But in America as well, there's the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. They do a two-week course as well. And if you want a general grounding about what you can get out of petrography, Patrick Quinn's book, Ceramic Petrography, is a great start. It's a really good introduction to help you. And if you want any further advice or comments or want some petrography done, then get in touch with me. My website's at the bottom. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Imogen. We've got time for one question, I think, so I'll pick this one from Sarah in the chat. But if you wanted to go in the chat, and you can answer the other questions if you like. Sarah asks, have you ever come across cremated human remains as grog?
I did once, yes, see some cremated human remains, and for a while it really confused me. I was like, what is this material? It was very strange, but it was very interesting because you could tell the difference between whether it was burnt obviously before or burnt afterwards. And that sounds stupid, but you know, that was very important. And also how angular it was too, whether it had been crushed. And I think when I showed it to a bone specialist, they sort of said that fracture could sort of indicate that it's from that sort of bone or that sort of type of bone. So it was very interesting, but you do get crushed bone